What we're doing tonight is we have a presentation requested very specifically from the last meeting from the council representing the post-pond group. I'll call it that loosely, but or concerned citizens at a slightly broader thing. There also, I gather that David has a fairly large amount of paper there, which I think he is going to thrust upon us. And then it shall be made part of the record and distributed appropriately. Bobby, I gather that you saw via email opposing councils. I'm just going to be blunt about council and opposing council. Emails.
We call worse.
I'm sure. I'm quite certain you all know each other quite well anyway, so I'm not worrying about that particular part. We're also open to any other comments such as members of the public may give. The goal tonight is to get through commentary and to begin to get a list called the findings of fact, which I would like to have publicly known and agreed upon, which the board will then use when it goes into deliberation. We do have a number of items which are still not resolved. Among these are the Conservation Commission. We have not heard from them yet. The other is that it has been observed on study of plan that the proposed location of the septic system encroaches on a steep slope zone. And so an additional variance might be required for that. We will have to determine that. And we do want to await the Conservation Commission's input before proceeding on that. Gentlemen, have I missed anything that is on your minds at this point? If not, then I would open the meeting.
I have one comment.
Certainly.
Suggestion, observation. Since the special exceptions that are being sought rely on the granting of the variances being sought, can we ignore for the time being testimony and opinions and requirements for special exceptions and deal only with the criteria, questions, and issues associated with the requirements for variances?
That would be my instinct. We have, yes.
Got one comment I think I want to make on that, and that is that we don't, if we should approve the variance,
Then we deal with.
Then we deal with the special
Then we
exception.
would deal with whatever special exceptions are still necessary. I don't know that we have information to determine all of the special exceptions that we will be needing.
Well, we certainly do not, because the Conservation Commission is pivotal
Among other
among those criteria.
Yeah, right.
But the special exceptions are simpler in the sense that they are a matter of straight decision in law.
Yes, right, in that respect,
Because
yeah.
if you meet the criteria, the special exception is to be granted. But my goal here tonight is to finish testimony to the degree possible, to define any missing parts, and to start talking about the findings of fact, but I do not anticipate tonight being able to go into deliberation.
Not without other pieces that we need.
Right. Okay, so Bobby, you have given us some more responses to questions. And I find that during my printout of your responses didn't get here somehow. I would appreciate that very much, David. Very, very much appreciated. I think we have a couple of bits of business to do first, which is to deal first with the Zoning Board of Adjustment minutes of April 15th. And,
Question.
sir,
Who's sitting on the board tonight?
yes, I actually, since all members are present, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I would prefer to, at this point, procedurally go with that. There's a reason for that, Walter, which I'll get to shortly. We have a letter from Mr. Morrissey requesting certain actions under the impression that Mike is a regular member rather than an alternate. And he wishes to disqualify him. So that I prefer that the board members at this point vote as a group, and then we will get to that letter. If that's okay with you.
Sure, I don't think the vote's required.
For the minutes.
With a member, oh, okay,
For the minutes.
All right.
All I want to do is get the minutes taken care
all right.
of. Okay, so the minutes of April 15th.
Move the approval.
I second it.
Any, all in favor?
Question, no.
Sir?
Corrections,
Yes.
first page, application 215 ZBO 6, paragraph 3, Walter Swift asked for a summary of variances and special
You
exceptions.
got those, Alan and Adair? Thank you, Walter. Anything else?
Yeah, I think I mentioned this, again, it's a minor thing, but the top of the next page, Walter asked if some sort of blackball test
Yes,
would
you did.
would need to be passed to purchase a unit. I think my request said, Walter asked if some sort of blackball test as described on their website. They have a procedure on the website that requires approval to purchase a unit. And, let's see. I didn't see anything else in the minutes that I could say needed correction, but I had some questions I'll follow up with later.
Thank you very much, Walter. It's been moved to make corrections. Corrections have been requested. All in favor of the corrections?
Aye.
All in favor of approving minutes?
For
For
the date
April
April
15th,
16th.
as amended.
Aye.
Aye?
Aye.
I'll abstain since I let you
Okay, that's fine. Okay, so, Rob, would you like to do April
Sure.
23?
On minutes of April 23, I have some corrections I would like to note, since I was the chair of that. In the 5th paragraph that starts, the board continues, in the 3rd line, toward the end of that 3rd line, Rich indicated it would place it more in the east. It was simply the buffer. So if anything, it's the west buffer for the wetlands in this way. So take out east, take it east. And then going down to the 10th line, toward the end, it talks about variation in the topology of the locations, not here.
How many lines up from the bottom of that paragraph?
6. Looks like 5, but it's 6.
Topology?
Yeah, I don't know if that's the right word. Gotta look it up.
Topology of the location.
Topography, I think it's
Topography.
topography.
Would be a better term.
Topography, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, change topology to topography.
And on the 2nd page, number 3, in terms of the items added, where it says on both sides of the veil, both sides. plural. Does anyone else have
So
any?
moved. Okay, next item of business. I believe we have a letter from Mr. Morrissey.
Actually, there are 2 letters from Mr. Morrissey. The first one, the second.
Maybe you could read it while I'm trying to separate these pieces of paper.
I'll see if you can say it.
Thank you.
What did I say?
Huh? Yeah, got it. Thanks.
Got it.
Okay. So there are 2 letters here. both May 6th. On the first letter, Mr. Morrissey raises a concern about conflict of interest due to the fact that Mike Woodard was the seller's broker when the Loch Lyme property was sold to its current owners. I'm just going to read the letter. In their application for variance, the current owners state that they attended a planning board meeting before they purchased the property to discuss their idea of co-housing development. It is likely there was some discussion between seller's broker and buyer about possible uses of the property. Now, almost 10 years later, the same broker sits on the zoning board whose charge is to evaluate whether or not to approve variances and special exceptions for the development of the buyers contemplated, when they bought the property. If I were Mike in Woodard's shoes, it would make me uncomfortable to participate in this decision. I would want the seller's broker, who is now almost 10 years later, has to make a decision. Would I want to be the seller's broker, who now, almost 10 years later, has to make a decision as to whether or not the buyer can ultimately execute the plan they bought the property from me? He thinks not. I expect that Mike believes that he can act impartially, but there's an appearance of a conflict here, and as a concerned neighbor, it makes me uncomfortable, and I hope that Mike will step down so as to make crystal clear that the board's decision is absolutely impartial. And I will comment to this. Fundamentally, the board has 5 regular members and 2 alternates. Alternate 1, alternate 2. It is our custom, and this custom will continue, that the alternates are given voice during meetings. But in the case that all 5 members are present, they have no vote. And so that unless my colleagues have some feeling about this, I would simply say we're moot on that point. Mike, what are your feelings on this?
I wouldn't be here if I felt there was a conflict. It was 10 years ago. Who I represented at that time, as any decent broker would do, is the seller's the selling agent, not the buyer's.
Right.
It is not a conflict for me at all. However, I certainly would go with the wish of the board.
My feeling is that if you do not have a formal vote on a variance request, and the audience is perfectly at liberty to hear what you're saying, and you don't feel conflicted, what do you feel, Rob?
I don't know that we know at this point who's gonna be participating in deliberation, and we're doing that. I guess I would just assume have the board vote on the conflict issue, and I frankly don't see one.
Okay, I'm calling under RSA, gospel is written. Actually, you're supposed to reverse your stole and cross in front of the altar. We'll do that. 673:14 has a procedure for this, and the board may vote if they wish to exclude a member for conflict of interest.
I will move that the board appreciates the concern expressed by Mr. Morrissey, that we take it seriously, and that our determination is that Mr. Woodard does not suffer from conflict at this point.
I second that motion.
I second it as well.
All in favor?
Aye.
The board has so voted, let this be noted. Now, we have Mr. Morrissey.
Yes.
Many of the points that I've scanned very quickly in your letter are also made in counsel's brief, which I thought was clear and succinct. Would you find it acceptable if we allowed him to speak
Completely.
to his whole set of concerns, and if you then feel that one of your concerns has not been answered properly, and that I'd be delighted to have you speak to?
No, I was saving you the trouble of having to listen to me.
Fine. Good. Now, the only question I have is to whether, since Bobby has some more things, and Mr. Tinsley, you have your brief, if I may say so.
Sure.
which do you all between you feel is more appropriate to go first? I'm gonna throw this right back in your laps.
I'm happy to let Roy have his due.
Fine.
Because
Great,
he carried over from last.
exactly.
And I just have a summary, I have a written response, because Roy sent me his letter
Sure,
2 days
yeah.
ago, but I don't wanna get in the way of his fanfare, so I would hold that till he has a
That's
chance
fine.
to do his thing.
Good.
Great.
Roy, would you like to proceed?
Am I okay sitting here?
You certainly are.
I'll skip the fanfare because I can't get the elephants and giraffes. in the
If I'd
room.
known, we'd have brought a trumpet.
Okay, my name is Roy Tilsley. I'm from Bernstein Shore in Manchester. I'm here today on behalf of mostly Post Pond Lane residents. My actual clients are attached to my so-called brief. I won't read them into the record, but this is who I represent.
So the brief becomes part of the record
Correct,
anyways.
correct, so I'll spare you that. My clients have asked me to come and speak to you and provide you with some legal memorandum regarding the criteria for a variance and their strong belief that this project does not meet the criteria to get a variance under RSA 674-33. My clients are concerned with the effect that this project will have on the Post Pond neighborhood. They're concerned about noise, traffic, their views, the condition of the pond. Adding 36 year-round condominium units changes this rural neighborhood forever. I guess I want to start by reminding the board, and I'm sure you guys folks are well aware of it, but the board's role in the variance process is to determine whether the property meets all 5 parts of the variance test set for in RSA 674-33. They're only entitled to a variance if the property, not their personal conditions, but the property meets all 5 elements. The board does not get to second guess the ordinance when it considers a variance application. So the applicant's position that this property is a good property for co-housing is not a variance criteria. It may be a good property to do it on, but that doesn't address the 5-part criteria as to whether they're entitled to a variance. It's not the suitability of the property for the use, it's whether the property meets the 5-part test. Simply because it might be a good place doesn't give the applicant the right to a variance. And even if this board agrees to some extent that this is an interesting project, or that this is a good location of the project, or the board feels that the zoning in this area should be different, that is not a basis to grant a variance. They have to meet all 5 parts of the 5-part test. As you folks know, the applicant purchased the property, I believe in 2005, was from the get-go, prior to purchase, admittedly looking at this type of co-housing project, has tried on several occasions to get the ordinance changed to allow this type of multifamily project in the rural district without success. That's a key factor in this case. They've attempted to change the ordinance. The people of this town have spoken and said, we do not want to change the ordinance to allow multifamily housing in this rural zone. The people of the town have already spoke to whether this project is suitable in this particular zone and said, no, we want to keep the rural zone the way it is. And the applicant and the ZBA do not get to second guess that decision about what the zoning ordinance should say. I haven't been here for all of these meetings. It's probably a good thing for me. Probably more so for my clients at my hourly rate. But from what I've been able to glean from the record, a lot of what the applicant is saying is that this is a suitable property for the project. The applicant has said, we could put 5 or 6 McMansions on this property. We could do sort of a traditional subdivision with 5 or 6 lots. But that's not the best type of development. It's not a bigger footprint, it's not as environmentally friendly, it's not as progressive as some of these other types of development. That's the question.
Yes. Is that your interpretation of what they're proposing? Are you paraphrasing what they said?
I think I'm paraphrasing what they said. I think,
Okay, thank you.
I think they have used the term McMansions in their documents. And my point is, my point is that, you know, the applicant is saying, we can do a standard subdivision here. We don't think that's the best way to develop the property, and we want to try this other, more different way, more interesting way, more progressive way, more environmentally friendly way. That's what I understand the applicant to be saying here. And you folks may even agree with them that this project is a better type of project than 5 or 6 single-family homes. Again, the ordinance and the townspeople, when they voted on it, have said that a 5 or 6 single-family home type of development is what is appropriate in this district. They have said that they do not want to expand the type of development in this district to multifamily type development, and it's not the job of the ZBA to second guess that. Even if you disagree with that decision, you have to live with it. And the question becomes, does the property meet the 5-part test for a variance from the restriction in the ordinance that prevents multifamily housing? I'm not going to get into each and every variance and special exception because I'll have to pull it till 9:30 and you folks don't want that. There's really, I think, 2 main variance requests here. One is the variance to allow multifamily housing in the rural district, and the second one is a variance to waive the 5-year waiting period for a conversion. I want to start with the conversion because I don't think it's a request that gets them the relief that they're looking for. If you grant a variance from the 5-year requirement for a conversion, then they would have the right, subject to planning board approval on a certain criteria, to convert existing buildings that have not been in existence for 5 years. They don't have any existing buildings. That variance, a variance that allows them to convert quicker than 5 years, is not a variance that gets them a building permit at the end of the day. It's not a variance to build, it's a variance to convert. This is simply not a conversion case. A conversion under section 4.46 of your ordinance must be to an allowed use. Multifamily housing is not an allowed use in this district. But the conversion variance should be denied. On the other hand, it's simply not applicable to what they're trying to do. If you gave them that variance, it still would not entitle them legally to build 36 units of multifamily housing. It would allow them to convert something, and you can't convert something that doesn't already exist. Obviously, the conversion request allows the applicant to argue that the site is somehow approved for 36 units. We take the 5 or 6 single-family homes that could be built. They could be possibly 5 years after they were built with planning board approval converted to possibly 6 units per single-family house. That would get them their 36 units. That perception is simply, I don't think, it's a possibility. The idea that somehow, as a matter of right, they would be able to convert 5 or 6 single-family homes and get the planning board approval necessarily to create 36 multifamily units is a possibility, but it feels to me like it's being presented to this board as something they're entitled to in 5 years, and why don't we just cut through this all and do it now rather than wait 5 years. I don't think that's the case. They can't convert something that doesn't exist. If they build 5 single-family homes and they decide to hold on to them for 5 years, and they want to come back to the planning board and go through the conversion process, at that time it would be appropriate to do that. But you can't convert something that exists, and I don't think that this board can assume that they have some kind of right to have 36 units simply because there's a conversion provision in the ordinance. The purpose of the conversion, the provision in question basically says you can convert uses as long as they're allowed uses in the zoning district. And it says if the property is, and I'm paraphrasing obviously, if the property is less than 5 years old, you can only convert it to single-family use. The purpose of that is clear. The purpose of that provision is to prevent developers from using the conversion provision to essentially develop property in conflict with the ordinance. You can't get to multifamily housing through the conversion provision until the property has been on the ground for 5 years, and then you have to go to the planning board. What they're asking you to do in this variance, assuming that it gets them anything, is exactly what the variance is designed to prevent. They're asking you to give them a variance to allow them to develop multifamily housing under the conversion provision, rather than build something first and then seek to convert it. The reason you have a 5-year window is to prevent developers from coming in and using the conversion provision as an end around on your zoning ordinance. And if this board grants a variance in this case, and I don't believe there's any basis to waive the 5-year window, you're gonna be on a very slippery slope, and a lot of other properties in town with a lot of other developers who are gonna come down the same route and say, I get a subdivision, I could build 4, 5, 6, 7 houses. I don't wanna do that. I wanna build 42 or 36 or 40 houses, and let's waive the conversion provision. You're gonna create a very slippery slope here. The conversion provision is simply not meant to be the basis for a developer to come in and develop property. Conversion is meant for existing properties where the size or the use may be obsolete, to be converted to other uses, or to be chopped up at some point into smaller uses in order that the properties, particularly historic properties, can continue to be viable in town under current economic conditions and circumstances. This is not a conversion, and there simply is no basis for a variance from the 5-year window. The 5-year window is designed to prevent a developer from using the conversion provision to build, and that's exactly what they're asking you to do. At its heart, their variance request is a variance to build multifamily condominiums for a co-housing project. I'm not quite sure that they could legally restrict it to co-housing, but that's what the application said. It's a variance for multifamily property in a condominium form of ownership. There's a proposal that 4 of the 36 units would be workforce housing. I think what I heard at the last meeting is that those 4 units would likely be in the last phases of the project. They, I think, put you on notice that they're going to rely on the workforce statute. This town has, in your ordinance, Article 11, adequate a language that allows affordable housing in town. It's our position that 11% of the units, 4 out of 36 as workforce housing, is not sufficient to provide them with the protection of the workforce housing statutory language. This town has an appropriate affordable housing ordinance, and while workforce housing is a good goal, I don't think that 4 out of 36 units at the end of the project, which hopefully will happen, but may or may not, entitles them to special protection under the statute. So, the question for you folks, I guess not tonight, but next time, will be whether the property meets the 5-part test for a variance for multifamily housing in the rural zone. Obviously, in my brief, I've covered each of the 5 parts in some detail. I'm not going to go through that inch by inch, but let me give you at least the highlights to put it on the record. The proposed project is not consistent with the spirit and intent of the ordinance. I think the intent of the ordinance here is abundantly clear, and that is that multifamily development is not allowed. That intent is clear because the townspeople have had a recent opportunity to vote to amend the ordinance to allow this use in this district, and they have chosen not to. So this is not one of those cases where the ordinance is 5, 10, 15, 20 years old, and the neighborhood has changed since it was adopted, and the people who create the ordinance in this town have very clearly had the chance to amend it and chosen not to. The intent is clear, is that this is a rural zone, single-family development, no multifamily housing. The developer has been working on this since before they bought the property. They knew when they bought it that it wasn't zoned for this. They tried to change the ordinance. Now they want a variance. Their request is not consistent with the spirit of the ordinance. The purpose of the ordinances, which is stated, that are violated, I pointed out, those purposes include to retain simple rural beauty in the town, to avoid undue concentration of population, to prevent overcrowding. All of those provisions of the ordinance, the intent of the ordinance, the spirit of the ordinance, are violated by this particular project, which seeks to introduce 36 multifamily housing units in this small residential neighborhood. There is simply no unnecessary hardship through literal enforcement of the ordinance. The first part of the unnecessary hardship test is that there has to be a special condition of the property that makes it different from other properties in the area. That's a condition of the property, not the property owner. This property, 94, 97 acres along the main road in town, is not uniquely situated. The topography is pretty standard for the town. Again, if the board determines that this property has a unique special condition, you're gonna be opening the door for a lot of other properties to come in and say, we've got tough slopes, we've got 94 acres, we wanna do multifamily housing just like those guys did. This property is not unique, it's a pretty standard size, layout, topography in this town, and there is simply no unique condition that would create an unnecessary hardship. Second point on this issue is, even if there's a special condition, even if there's an unnecessary hardship here, it's been created by the applicant. This property in question, the 94, I think it's 94, it's either 94 or 97 acres, was subdivided from the historic lodge property, I believe, late last year. For many, many years, this property had a reasonable economic use as part of the lodge property. This applicant chose to subdivide it. This applicant, when they did so, at least according to the planning board minutes, stated that the intent of the subdivision was to consolidate the lodge operations into one lot while maximizing the remaining lot for future development. They created this lot that now has no use on it. They created this lot which they now say is unique and has a hardship. They created this lot for maximum development. This is a self-created hardship. This lot had an appropriate use for years and years and years. They've created it. If there is a hardship, it's been self-created. The law is clear. You cannot rely on a self-created hardship to establish unnecessary hardship for a variance. This is not the situation that you typically see where, if I was to buy this property, some people might say, well, you bought the property and you knew when you bought it that this 94, 97 acres couldn't be used for your project. Therefore, it's a self-created hardship. If I buy it, I can argue it, but they created it. They created this lot. They created the lot that they now come to you and say has a hardship on it. That is not sufficient to create a hardship for various purposes. If there's a special condition of the property, the next part of the unnecessary hardship test is whether the multifamily restriction interferes with the reasonable use of the property. They have a reasonable use of the property. We've already talked about it. They've told you that in the application. They could build 5 or 6 single-family homes and have a typical residential subdivision here. That's a reasonable use of the property under the current zoning ordinance. Again, may not be the best use of the property, may not be the use that they want, may not be the use that you folks think is the best use, but it's a reasonable economic use of the property Therefore, even if there's a special condition, the multifamily restriction does not interfere with the reasonable use of the property. The current zoning ordinance provides them with reasonable development options, which they've essentially acknowledged in their application. Finally, on unnecessary hardship, there also has to be a fair and substantial relationship between the restriction and the purpose of the ordinance. If there's not, then there's unnecessary hardship. Here, the restriction to not have multifamily housing in the rural district is to preserve the rural character, to control density. That, as I've already been through with the spirit and intent, is related to the stated purposes of the ordinance. Simply put, there is no special condition and none of the other requirements to establish unnecessary hardship for this property under the unnecessary hardship criteria. The third criteria is that the variance will not result in substantial justice. In this case, the variance will change the character of this single-family residential neighborhood. There's no injustice to the applicant because they still have the very reasonable option to develop this new lot that they've created in a typical single-family residential fashion. There is substantial justice. You do not need the variance to get substantial justice. The variance, if granted, would be contrary to the public interest. The variance will increase population density in this neighborhood year-round by 200%. It will lead to an increase in traffic. It will lead to an increase in the use of the pond, which is obviously one of the amenities, public amenity, but you'll now have 200% more people living within close distance of the pond. Finally, the fifth criteria is the development will diminish my client's property values. There will be noise, there will be light from the development, you'll be able to see the development from the other side of the pond, there'll be traffic, there'll be construction, there'll be degradation of the pond with increased use by many more year-round users. All of those factors will result in a diminution of property values in the post-pond neighborhood. Simply put, under the zoning ordinance, this is the wrong place for this project. They purchased the property, they knew that they couldn't do it, they tried to change the ordinance, and now they want a variance. The property itself, which they created, does not meet any of the 5 criteria for a variance. Most importantly, it's not consistent with the spirit and intent of the ordinance as reflected by the voters who have determined not to amend the ordinance to allow this, and there's no unnecessary hardship as there is no special condition of this property. Any hardship was created by the applicant, and there's no relationship, but there's still reasonable use of the property under the current ordinance. We urge you to deny the variance request. I'm obviously happy to answer any questions or concerns that the board has on behalf of my clients. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Tom, does that encapsulate everything you wanted to tell us?
Totally fine.
Wonderful, good. Gentlemen, do you have any specific questions? If not, then I would invite Bobby to present the materials that she's put together. Norman?
Just one question. Do you know of any study that's been done, or do you have any data about the density of this proposed project versus the density, population density in any other parts of town except for the Post Pond Road?
I don't know of any. We simply looked at the number of people with 36 units being added to this neighborhood, but we haven't compared it to other neighborhoods in town.
Thanks.
Okay. Ma'am?
More reading.
What? You don't have to read. I'll give
Oh,
you
yes,
the
I
Cliff Notes
do.
version.
More paper?
More
More
paper?
paper,
I have a summary which I was going to, I'll give it now, but I was kind of saving, you had asked for us to kind of summarize our
Yes.
proposal, so I have that. I also have a response to Roy's letter that I will pass around. Summary to save for later. And just a couple of highlights in the letter to the points that Roy brought up. This is not, there's a reference and an attempt to sort of create a post-pond neighborhood. As the board knows, this is not the typical neighborhood. Several of the opponents represented by Attorney Tilsley are across the pond. None of the opponents are defined as abutters to this property. They're in the vicinity. Several are across the pond, several are on lots that are of greater density, meaning less land per unit than the proposal before you. Several of the opponents to have addresses outside of Lyme. And again, none are direct abutters. So to our way of thinking, it's a bit of pull up the drawbridge and we're here and no new people is reflected in their position. There's also a fundamental misconception that comes up often in variance situations. The difference between strict enforcement of an ordinance and what the zoning board is here to do, which is to provide relief when relief is indicated. Relief from what? Zoning is authorized, delegated to towns. It's a constitutionally based function. Sit as quasi-judicial officers. Zoning is a broad process that evolved, not yet 100 years old, that evolved to attempt to organize land use, but it is not site-specific. And so when the general imposes a hardship on the specific property, that's what the zoning board is here to do. Why are we here for a variance? The second misconception we've heard a lot about tonight is, oh, the town voted this proposal down. That's wrong. The town did not vote this proposal down. There's a difference between variance relief, which is site-specific and project-specific, and rezoning attempts, several, and I think we have an outline in our notebook of the attempts that the Pinnacle group made to work with the planning board to try to amend the zoning to provide not spot zoning for this property, but a relaxation of the ordinance on several properties that would allow this type of development. The vote that happened is not the same as this variance relief that we're here before you tonight about. It was an attempt to amend the zoning ordinance to deal with some of these issues that provide sort of an overly restrictive zoning scheme. So it's not the same. And so it's a little bit unfair to say the town voted this project down. It didn't. That's inaccurate. The provision, and again, we're not asking this board to second guess the ordinance, and Roy's emphasis on this board may agree that it's suitable, that it's interesting, it's a good location, but those aren't reasons to grant a variance. Well, we say they are, and why? The reason they are is that part of the hardship analysis is whether the proposal before you is reasonable. A reasonable use of the land that's prevented by an overly restrictive application of the ordinance. So to the extent that, and our proposal does, it mirrors various provisions of the ordinance. In density, it mirrors what could be accomplished if 6 structures were built and converted in 5 years. So we're consistent with the conversion option under the ordinance. Why is that conversion option there? Partly to repurpose older buildings. I would submit that a 5-year-old building is not historic. It may also be there to help provide housing opportunities, affordable housing opportunities. It's there to provide a relaxation in density. It's allowed throughout the town, so it's not, it would be a pathway to an increased density in the rural district, so our proposal's not inconsistent with that provision of the ordinance. Similarly, the Pinnacle proposal is less dense than is allowed under Article 11, the affordable housing provisions of the ordinance. So what we've attempted to do, we've done it in the summary, we've done it in tab 17, is show how this proposal is reasonable in light of the ordinance provisions that the town has. I think we calculated under the affordable housing 4 per 2 acres, effectively you could have 48 units on the site. We're only seeking 36. In terms of diminution of value, we've provided a realtor's opinion. And I understand that people have concerns about change, but change doesn't mean diminution of value. And certainly construction is a temporary fact of life and is not a factor that this board can weigh in terms of diminished value. If more people at the town beach is an issue, then the town would have to pull up that drawbridge and not allow any new members in town. So I don't see that that is a reasonable opposition. And finally, the uniqueness of this property is more than the steep slopes. It's more than the overlay districts. And it's more than the permitted uses in the rural zone. It's all of those. When you take a 94-acre piece of property and you start to overlay the conservation districts, steep slopes removes a certain amount of land from the development calculation. Wetland buffers, you've got significant ones. That removes another bit of land from the development calculation. When you overlay then the agricultural soil protections, that removes about all the rest of the remaining land for development. So when you take those three and you put it next to the rural zone, which focuses on single-family homes, which can be clustered, but you're talking about building interior roads, cutting into those slopes, it makes the development under the existing ordinance nearly impossible. So what we've tried to do is take this parcel on a main road, so you aren't building interior roads, that has steep slopes, that's positioned next to a hospitality use. You aren't going to easily put 5 lots in that location. We've tried to take this unique property and site this project on it, given its natural characteristics. So it is unique. And finally, subdividing the property doesn't mean the owners leave their constitutional rights at the door. This created hardship argument is old news. The property itself continues to hold its bundle of stakes, its rights in terms of reasonable use. And so, because it was subdivided doesn't mean those rights evaporate. What we're looking at is this property under the existing zoning ordinance, and like I said, makes it nearly impossible to develop reasonably without some relief, and the relief that we're seeking. So that's the Cliff Notes version of my rebuttal, if you will. In terms of the summary, and I think we've spent all our meetings here trying to, A, focus on the relief we're seeking. This board asked us last time to sort of pick a route. We developed the project sort of using, again, some provisions of the ordinance to sort of cue it or define it. One being the lot size averaging, which is very innovative and helps preserve open space. So we took from that and said, gee, if we can follow those dictates, we get 5 or 6 lots. We took the conversion option, which I think is another really innovative provision of the ordinance that allows for an affordability and a density sort of relief from what otherwise could be overly restrictive. That gave us our 36 units. But what we're looking for, and we have picked, is the single-use variance, and that's what I've tried to summarize here. For this co-housing, planned development, the ordinance allows planned developments, just not in this zone. But to allow this planned development, these 36 units clustered in 6 buildings in the rural zone. That's the variance, the use variance. We think, and we've spent a lot of time showing that it's consistent with the master plan and consistent with the provisions of the ordinance. A subsidiary variance that would go with that is the lot coverage, because once you take the 94 acres as one lot, we're limited to that 26,000 lot coverage. And so, again, you look at the purpose for the lot coverage ordinance. Obviously, you don't want lots to be dominated by building construction, but 26,000 square feet on 94 acres is a really overly restrictive limit. So we would need relief from that. And then there are the list of special exceptions noted earlier that would enable specific parts of the development. So in general, this is my little closing comment, when you analyze unnecessary hardship, it's not just that the ordinance imposes a hardship on the property. It's that the ordinance imposes an unnecessary hardship. And how do we define unnecessary? It's unnecessary when it's not needed to protect the public health, safety, welfare of the town. And so we submit that the restriction here, we have shown that this proposal is consistent with the master plan, is consistent with the ordinance, and does no harm to the health, safety, welfare of the town. In which case, the overlay district restrictions and the use restrictions are unnecessary to enable, to protect the town, and they restrict a reasonable use of the property.
Okay. Do we have other public comments?
Can I ask questions before we get off the topic?
Sorry.
Okay, I had a couple of questions, clarifications on what you said. Back to, you said that the vote on the expansion amendment in the zoning ordinance by the town wasn't the only vote related to increasing. Run that by me again. I had the impression from what you said that you thought that there were several amendments proposed and voted on over the past period of time that were aimed at expanding or changing the ordinance in some way to increase population allowances. And I wonder if you could tell me which votes those were, or when they were proposed, or what it meant. The only one I'm familiar, whoever made the statement, because the only one I'm familiar with is the one that happened a couple of years ago, when the planning board and you folks negotiated some sort of proposed change to the ordinance that would allow an increase in population in a rural district, or you wanted to change the district. I'm not familiar with any other ordinance amendments that were proposed in the past, I don't know, 10 years that had any relationship with that. Can you remind me?
There were 3 efforts, and Liz will jump in, working with the planning board. We have them detailed at tab 11 of the March notebook.
But they never went to town meeting?
No.
One was withdrawn.
They asked us to withdraw both of them. We worked with the board for 6 months on both of them. Prepared materials, got language by petition, brought it to the board, and after it was too late to change it, then the board said, oh, you've made a mistake. And it was only the third one that we brought to the town, and that was a vote of 4-1, where the planning board, 4 of them supported it and 1 did not.
Okay,
And I
so-
can tell you
So there was-
more, but.
So there was
I-
one amendment that was
Right.
There were
proposed
3
to the town.
separate. no,
There was one
amendments.
amendment
Right.
that went to town vote,
Correct, correct.
That's correct.
and the town voted on that amendment, and,
Correct.
all right. so-
That was to allow, and we have it here, it was.
Yeah, I
yeah.
read that one, I just hadn't,
Sure, it was
been
to
aware
allow
of others.
conservation neighborhoods on large parcels of land, so it wasn't specific to the rural district, and it wasn't specific to this property.
the second,
Can I clarify that? It seems to me that the conservation district talked about being within a mile of the common district and also talked about no more than 26 units. Are you really saying it's not particular to this property?
It was conservation neighborhoods on large parcels of land,
What tab are you looking at?
11,
She's not.
Thank you.
yeah.
I think David could speak to that, but there were 3 or 4 parcels that it would have applied to. And Rich, you were just
Yeah,
saying.
I was gonna say, to follow up on what Bobby was saying, after that vote at town meeting where the conservation neighborhood was voted down, we spoke to a lot of people who said, you know, I really like the idea, but I was just uncomfortable with the notion of changing the ordinance. I couldn't understand what it was gonna mean, and so the vote, it's clear, the vote was about 2-1 against, but I think if there were some follow-up, certainly our informal discussions with people, a large number of people said they voted against it, even though they were comfortable with the notion, they simply didn't want to change the ordinance.
Okay,
That part of
thanks,
the,
yeah.
part of the genesis for our coming back to say, well, let's work within the terms of the ordinance and make this request.
okay. So then the next question I had is, you said that you were talking about the uniqueness of this property. And part of the uniqueness is the overlays of all the districts that reduce the acreage and things like that. Have you looked at other properties along Route 10 in the rural district and made similar comparisons with the overlays in those properties of similar size?
It's a combination of the overlay here, the configuration of this land, and it's being adjacent to the hospitality business, and also its position across from the pond, Palm Beach. So no, I haven't analyzed other properties.
So you haven't looked at
That's
the
not-
other properties that have, overlays of comparable
Right,
demand and
obviously
wetlands and water bodies?
you'd have to know the agricultural soils, wetland buffers, and
Yeah, those
steep
are-
slopes.
Those are delineated in the
Right.
ordinance, okay. And the last issue that I can recall, you said something about that you used the multifamily dwelling coupled, the multifamily dwelling section coupled with the lot coverage, lot size averaging provision in the ordinance to come up with numbers that made sense in terms of the project. But did I understand you to say that you are abandoning variances from those sections of the ordinance and only requesting a variance on the 26,000 square foot and the allowance of multi-family dwellings in the rural district? Is that the only variance you're requesting now?
We were asked to choose.
Yeah.
Because we had 2 options. And so we were asked to choose, and if you go to tab 17, we had a chart, if you will. The one variance is to allow this multifamily co-housing project in the rural zone. And so the basis for that is, there are many ways to get there, but essentially it would be a use variance to have this use in a zone where it isn't presently allowed.
Let me be more specific. We have to vote on several variances. Do you want us to vote on all 3 variance requests? Or do you want us to vote on one and only consider the information you provided to back up the other two as just background data?
It's a hard question because we submitted both approaches.
Yeah,
And I'd be happy to have the board consider both approaches. We were asked to pick one,
yes.
so we picked one, but
So the one you picked is the second one, option B, that you had listed somewhere.
it's, the one we picked was the basic variance to allow this planned multifamily use in the rural zone.
So that's basically a use variance for table 4.1 that
Mhm.
does not allow such use.
Correct.
And a subpart of that is an allowance for greater than 26,000 square feet on that single lot.
On that single lot.
And the
correct.
other two things that were in there about multifamily dwellings and all that, we can
The
ignore.
5-year wait period.
We can ignore that.
Yeah, if you,
Okay.
I mean, like I said, I'd be happy to have you consider both, but if we have to choose, we'll choose the one and the other one becomes background support.
All right, so one thing we can decide on is whether we want to just look at one or look at all.
Seems to me that's
Right.
right.
That's in deliberation. Yeah, but I wanted to find out
Yeah,
whether you
that's
had
fine.
made that decision.
Yes.
Okay.
I do. You submitted some supplemental material, and I have some questions on that, but let me jump to the last one of those. You said that you would address the various questions we had on the site visit at this meeting. Do you
Yes.
have some additional materials that you're submitting?
We submitted those a week ago.
I got a draft of email, but I did not get one that,
What, did this circulate? The response to questions from the April 15th meeting? Oh, the site
Site visit.
Yeah,
question
yeah.
stuff.
You
Those,
said you would be answering.
we have some, we don't have all. Because, but we do have some,
Well,
yes.
If this is an appropriate time, maybe I ask some
Sure.
questions on that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, number one, home ownership. You have now indicated that I guess it's going to be condominium ownership, which is fairly typical.
As
Ooh.
long as we reserve the co-op sort of option depending on financing requirements.
Who is the declarant or developer?
Yeah,
Pinnacle
it's
Project?
Pinnacle Project
LLC.
LLC.
Okay, the property is owned by Lockline Lodge Inc. How do you transition?
There would, in essence, they're an option holder. There would have to be a transfer of title.
So who will be the party financing? Either borrowing from
A
owners or from
combination,
a bank?
as we discussed, I think, the last meeting, the financing is a combination of investment by the members of the LLC, seed money, if you will, and then the LLC would be borrowing from a lender.
And the individual owners, homeowners, all go get their own mortgage. That's the model of condominium development and co-housing.
Well, the general model is that you would finance about 70% through bank finance. And so you're saying you're not going to do that?
There's the land development piece, and then there's the construction
Right.
piece,
The con-
and they can be financed
Okay.
separately.
Your item number 6 said you expect you need about $9 million for phase 1.
Yes.
Do you have some pro formas on that? I mean, if I go to the New Hampshire, the finance agency, and it says, you know, I can ask for pro formas and so on and so forth. Do you have pro formas? I thought there was some reference to that at a prior time.
We do, but I'm not sure what you're looking for. I mean, Michael Bruss is here, who's been working with us, and then David Pride from Pride Development, and we have pro formas for the entire project.
I guess from the standpoint of two of the findings we need to make, public interest and justice, viability of the project is a fair question. And I'm asking what more you are intending to provide to us beyond what you've said in terms of summary of the findings.
I guess it's an interesting question because normally variance applicants don't submit their financials to the zoning board. they obviously have to be vetted by the lender if they're seeking loans. I think it's a little premature, I think as I said last meeting, before there's approval for a project, to get into a lot of detail in terms of financing, but I do think this group has done an awful lot more legwork than most applicants would have done at this stage of the process. So is there a specific pro forma to share, and is that what the board's asking for?
Let me put it this way,
Okay.
the New Hampshire Municipal Finance Agency's Meeting the Workforce Challenge
Okay.
would say that as part of what the land use board or agency was considering would be appropriately to ask
With
those
a-
kind of questions.
With respect to the workforce housing.
Well, that's a part of your
Portion.
process.
Okay, now I'm just trying to figure out,
The-
in terms of financing the whole project, like I said, that's unusual.
the-
If the board's concern is, will the workforce units actually occur? I think
Yes.
that's,
I
yeah,
mean, our developer develops affordable housing, that's his expertise, and so, that's, we're not proposing to have workforce housing that we can't do. So if we came to the stage of having to, as if we were gonna go to planning board and get permission for workforce housing, I think it's fair to say we're pretty close to being able to, would you say that, Michael, to come in and say this is how it looks, and this assessment is, it will cost us, we need to come up with about $50,000 of funding for each of the workforce units that will be needed, and we can bring in.
I guess I was asking the broader question for both the project as well as the workforce. That is, for example, under the numbers you gave us, to get your phase one, you have to raise the equivalent of about $450,000 a unit. For
Well,
the whole
we've already
project,
put
you have
quite
to
a
raise
bit
about $375,000 a unit. When you go to the municipal financing, they say, gee, these are the kind of analyses that you should be giving for developing the workforce housing component.
when you get to the financing stage, absolutely. I used to
No,
do those
this
pro
is-
formas in development, but at the variance stage,
You're asking us to be the land use board with respect to this project.
no,
Because you're
we're-
asking for a variance.
we're
So you're
simply-
asking us to do this.
right, we're simply asking for a variance from
Let
the
me,
zoning ordinance.
is there any more information you're intending to share?
We certainly could give it to you. We're a little reluctant to share our figures with the board at this point, because
Why?
we wouldn't ordinarily do that. Because it would show how much we're paying for. I mean, maybe,
I guess
I
there's a
would want counsel's advice
confidentiality
and-
provision, but. we
Michael,
could-
have you ever had to do this before?
No, my experience is it's not come up in ZBA proceedings.
If I'm correct, you're the gentleman who indicated a couple sessions ago that you did have performance.
We're working on pro formas. It's a matter of,
Okay,
it's a
okay.
matter of,
You
I mean,
also
if the
indi-
board needs to have the pro forma in order to consider the variance, I don't see any, if that's the
Right.
condition, we can do it. We're ready to do it.
Mhm.
I think it goes to the issue of, is it fine?
If we can have some, I know it's tough in a public seating, but I would like to think there could be some confidentiality associated with the provision of financial documentation.
Yes, except that if this case goes to a legal review or appeal on either side, of course, that's going to run the risk.
Well, then we would be prepared.
Let me move on.
Understand.
The other position, you mentioned that you were doing a market analysis. By Doug Kennedy was doing it.
Yes, that's been
What's the
completed.
status of that?
That's complete. And are you
As the
asking for our, again, are you asking for our market analysis? I mean, he's certainly,
I
he
asked that question.
substantiated that our prices that we're anticipating are reasonable in the market, and that we can integrate 4 units of workforce housing into the plan. And if you want his market analysis, which I'm a little reluctant to share, I guess under the same confidentiality things, we'd be happy to share it.
I think one of our concerns is very simply that the workforce housing looks like it's something that might happen late and maybe.
Their plan is to do it in one in each unit.
In each phase.
in each phase.
It's not correct to say they're all coming at the
Right.
end.
Yeah,
That's
you
a
said that,
misnomer.
but
Yeah.
you just didn't know.
That implies then, for example, were you to be given permission to build the rather large structure you're talking about, that one of those units in there would be workforce housing.
Yes.
Per phase, absolutely.
I have an insight now. I don't know if it will be helpful or not, but let me try. We intend to build units that will cost about half of what all the new housing in Lyme has cost over the past 10 years. The new housing in Lyme, I think we said, is $826,000 on average.
That's been the average, the appraised value of a project for a new construction.
Our average appraised value will run between 250 and 450. We had intended to have much more workforce housing, but the interest on waiting for 10 years, as anyone who does development knows, is significant. So the longer it takes, the fewer affordable units we can integrate. But I believe the board could grant a variance separate from any representations that we want to include workforce housing in this. We're saying that this is a unique project because of the hospitality business and all the other reasons Bobby has set out, that will, because of the size of the units, provide housing that people can afford to buy, separate and independent from whether we meet the Grafton County workforce housing requirements.
Why is the hospitality business a positive aspect of the variance decision criterion?
You're not gonna have a lot of hospitality businesses, people wanting to develop next to hospitality businesses in Lyme. This is the only one.
I mean, is the hospitality business there to provide food for the people in the condominium development?
No, the reason it causes a unique impact on this property is it is not, it's a pre-existing use, a lodging business is permitted, but it's not a line of single-family residential uses. It is a different use next to this property. So in order to build the traditional 5-unit, 5-house subdivision, you're putting it next to a use that's not the same.
That's that condition has been created by the subdivision.
The condition is the condition of the empty acres next to, the lodge only operates on a certain number of acres. So if the 94 acres were still part of the lodge property, as Roy was saying, you have no use for those acres except in support of the lodge property. They don't have a use. So subdividing them there next to a somewhat incompatible use, but in order to try to
I'm
get
sure, Bobby,
some
that I
use.
agree those are all positive arguments, but that's for the deliberation of the board.
Right. Basically, when boards look at variance requests, they do take a look at surrounding properties. For example, again, the densities, some of the properties around the pond are very small, less than an acre in size. So you have to take into account what's there, and you have to take into account changes in uses on the land and also in how people live. Zoning isn't static. It's not just something that gets created once and then is valid as life moves forward. It has to reflect what's going on around it.
Rob, do you have some more questions? Sir?
Just two. In your number 16 of your supplement, you talked about we're not using lot size averaging per se. Do you mean that you are not, you would, if we granted the variance, you would not be going back to the planning board for lot size
We
averaging?
have to go to the planning board
Yeah,
for site
okay,
plan
so you-
review, like a
okay.
planned unit development. We aren't using the lot size averaging per se, except to borrow from it the concepts of preserving open space by clustering units and sort of that zero lot line construction that's allowed.
If I may use the term, it's a somewhat theological argument used to create a scenario from which you can argue.
It's actually a genuine effort to present a proposal that reflects what is in the ordinance and therefore reflects the purpose and goal of the ordinance. It's not really just to create a platform to come in here and make an argument. It's actually, this group has been spending an awful lot of time trying to reflect the spirit and intent of the ordinance and the master plan. With the exception, I have to point out, one point of the master plan to keeping Lyme's population small is not a legitimate purpose of land use planning. So, with the exception of that piece, the rest of this proposal is geared to reflecting what's already allowed in Lyme in terms of innovative land use controls.
Last question. There were 5 items we asked for after the site visit. What might you offer to us?
We have some of those.
Yeah, do you have the list?
When was the boundary?
Right.
You need it to, it's in the minutes, I'll give it to you.
Yeah, if you want to read the first one, we can go through them.
Define the southern property line.
Sure. I have a copy of boundary plan. So if you look at the plan that I showed, we show just a straight line. That's more of a tie line. The actual boundary line follows the old fence line, which is actually further away from that. We showed that as a conservative, kind of a conservative approach. So I do have a couple copies of the boundary plan.
Okay.
So, here's another one. So, this has been prepared by our surveyor. They did complete a full boundary survey after. So you can see it's actually quite a bit further away from that tile, line. This is 2 pages. That's the second page of the paper.
No. The second one was to add the elevations to the corner points of Vale, Common House and Crest.
Did you add elevations?
I do not have that with me today. I will get it to you.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
I do not have that today.
I will get it to you.
Yeah, were you looking for us to
On the
label?
plan or on the ground? That was our question. We had some
We did it on the ground.
On the plan.
on the plan.
Yeah.
Okay, because we had some questions with Dave about whether you were planning to go back out and did we have to mark it on the ground? So,
No, between what you presented here, I'm satisfied, but
Okay.
I'm speaking only for myself.
okay.
So you wanted building heights at the
Yeah.
corners on the plan?
On the plan.
Okay.
Okay. Better define the drainage area and eastern driveway, and on both sides of Vale, Common House and Crest, and confirm they have wetlands.
We caught up with Jonathan Sisson, the wetland scientist, and I tried to get hold of him a couple days ago, and he actually just emailed you about 20 minutes ago. He just sent me a text. We sent him out in November, and he confirmed that the wetlands shown on the plan that we submitted were accurate. He delineated those according to the Army Corps of Engineers' 3 criteria for hydrology, soils, and plants. And so anything shown on our plan is accurate out there. If there are other areas that, might be a drainage channel, they don't meet the wetlands criteria, so
That's
they're
what I
not sure.
suspected was the case, is that you
Okay.
have probably 1 and maybe 2, but not the 3rd criteria.
Correct.
Because I'll bet the soils underneath all that boulder field are hybrid, but you don't have the vegetation. And so it
Right.
doesn't meet the wetland criteria.
Yeah, he's a certified wetland scientist, so I trust his judgment. I'm not a wetland scientist, so we rely on the professionals to
Yeah.
delineate it. We just locate it.
Yeah, you gotta have all 3.
Yep.
The fourth was the staking of the location to the sewer main, and maybe that's.
We
maybe-
we didn't stake anything out, no. So you're looking for stakes in the actual force main location and in the proposed leach field area?
Well, the Conservation Commission really can't
Yeah.
do anything for
Yeah.
us until they have the stakes.
Okay, I mean, it's,
And we really do need, very seriously, since your diagram shows that the leach field area goes right into the steep slopes. Have you done soil pits up there?
we did.
Okay, but that's still a designated steep slope zone,
Right.
and as such would require action by the board to allow that to happen. That's not a special exception.
I think it is a special exception, isn't it? Based
To
on
build on a steep slope?
462B2 says that grading, excavation, whatnot in a steep slope is a special exception, doesn't it?
I'm gonna check that.
I believe it's a special exception.
Maybe what the board may need to look at is, septic systems are considered a structure, and is that a structure within the steep slopes?
Yeah,
Yeah, no, that's what Frank was saying.
that's what my concern is.
So I actually,
It's not a grading issue, it's a structure.
yeah, I actually just looked at this plan a little more closely, and the area where the leach field actually is shown encroaching on that little strip of steep slope, I don't believe that that actually meets the definition of a steep slope, because if you read the definition, it says areas of grade change of 20 feet or more that have an average slope of 20%
Okay.
or more. This section that we're encroaching on only has a grade change of 14 feet. So I think this was software generated. Basically, this just highlighted all the areas that we used in our software that were over 20%. So I think actually that should be revised, and that little finger should actually be removed. So I don't think that we're actually gonna be disturbing in the actual defined steep slope area.
And
We need to have that.
And when it's staked, it'll be clarified.
Yeah, but I think the board cannot act without the Conservation Commission. The Conservation Commission can't
Needs
do
that
its job
information.
without being able to walk the force main line. And,
And then we
some-
would need that document as
and we,
evidence for
yeah, because that has to be
what you
presented as a
claim.
finding.
So Rich, are we arranging with Chris to get those items staked?
I've not heard back from him. I saw your note to him. I've not heard back, so I'll follow up.
Yeah, okay, we'll both follow.
And we did 3 test pits up in that area. We set survey benchmarks that are required for the swing ties to locate the leach field, so it is all ready to go. We haven't designed the leach field fully. What I showed on here is just a preliminary. There's other options that we're probably going to end up going with, such as a clean solution septic system, which is basically like a mini wastewater treatment plant. There's multiple tanks, and what they do is they do all the treatment in the tanks. So the leach field itself is actually only a water dispersal field.
This is a denitrified septic system.
Doesn't denitrify, no.
Doesn't?
No. This just provides treatment, the same as a leach field. Does it denitrify? I don't think it does. Maybe it does. I haven't done one
I
in
thought Clean Solution specifically did denitrify. Doesn't matter.
I don't think they do. But the leach fields end up being about 10% of the size that they would be. So we might actually be able to do a much smaller leach field here than what we have shown in the plan. But again, we're not going to go through the full engineering, full design until we have some direction from the board. So I think basically that whole finger of what we show on our steep slopes map, I think that finger actually goes away because it doesn't meet that 20 feet. Do you agree that it has to be 20 feet or 10 grades or more?
And we agree that it has to meet the requirements of the ordinance as written.
Okay. So my interpretation is that that finger actually goes away, so we don't actually encroach on the legal steep slopes.
That has to be substantiated.
The last question I think we had, in your tab 4, you talked about the phasing, and that was the common house, I think, I forget which is the 11-unit wing, and then one of the multiplexes. The question we had at the site visit was, what infrastructure things would be built during what phases? There was some indication that it would not all be done in the first phase, the infrastructure issues. And so I'd like more.
Brian will correct me if I'm wrong, but obviously, part of the road infrastructure would have to be part of phase 1. The utilities in terms of the well, and the septic system leach field would necessarily have to be constructed. So that's the majority of it.
Yeah, but I was going to ask, that's
Yeah.
really the question I'm asking, isn't it? Really
Yeah.
most of the infrastructure?
Most of it.
Okay.
The rest of the road, no, but yeah, certainly the entrance. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I mean, given the relief on that site, I mean, given the formidable challenge represented by putting a driveway there at all, and then the site elevations associated with those 3 houses, you're gonna have to do a tremendous amount of work just to be able to create foundations there.
Right. Yeah, we did design the roads so that the building finished floor elevations are close to the existing topography, so, you know, we don't anticipate massive amounts of earthwork, but, you know, you have to install the roads and you have to do the foundations, and there are,
Note a few small caveats.
with that,
A few small caveats that were not
Yeah.
climbable. There are a few little caveats in there that are substantial.
It's not
Yeah.
nearly as bad as the road that would be needed, internal road for a subdivision.
Is that what we would do if we did the 12-unit subdivision?
Yes. To provide frontage.
Chairman, I have a question.
Sir?
What is the proposal in front of us that we will ultimately vote on? I see a summary here that says 36 co-housing units clustered in 6 buildings. Is that your final submission?
That's been the submission, yes.
There's no reference in this to conversion.
Again, the conversion waiver was an alternate view of how, of a way for variance relief. So, allowing.
Yes or no, I think is
Yes,
what I'm
allowing
asking.
the lot size averaging subdivision concept to provide the 6 initial buildings, but waiving the 5 years so it could be constructed all at once.
So it requires a variance on 2 aspects of the ordinance, is that correct?
No, we're going with the one, the use variance with the subsidiary lot coverage area variance.
Those are 2 variances.
Two.
And what
Right.
about the section 446? I guess, does that have any bearing on what you will expect us to deliberate on?
Meaning the conversion
Yes, I'm
process?
sorry, yes.
Only to the extent it provides consistency or allows you to find that the proposal is consistent with the spirit and intent of the ordinance in terms of ultimate density.
And do you feel that you have provided the board with information to address the relevant sections of 446?
The conversion
Yes.
provision. Again, that's only for context on the use variance request.
Well, there are several situations here that are called out specifically, just to mention a couple. The building is served by adequate off-street parking and loading meeting the standards set forth in Article 7. Another one is the driveway is served by a driver that conforms to the standard contained in section 4.53 and so forth. So is it your intent to provide documentation that addresses the applicable standards and criteria under 446 that would allow the board to consider a conversion, whether it was in 5 years or not?
Not at this time.
Then how would we come to a point where we would say the conversion is okay, but we really don't have enough information, if it were 5 years old, to say it was okay? I'm unclear how we would address that
at
point in
this
the
point-
ordinance. Let me finish, please.
Okay, yeah.
How we would address that point in the ordinance without specific information that would allow us to, because, I mean, there's 2 pieces clearly. The first is the site plan, which is the planning board's piece, right? We know that part. But must meet all the criteria as well as the following criteria, and it lists A through G. Now, some are clearly, I'm assuming not applicable, conversion to non-residential, for example, okay, so we put that, and so forth. Building is served by a septic system that meets both local and state standards, right? So there are specific criteria here that have to be met
Right.
in order to take a look at that section.
To the extent the board wants to step through those requirements, I guess my argument is this plan, because it meets road standards, septic and utility service standards, I would say the board has sufficient information to evaluate
And
for
have you gone through these internally and made that decision, or are you just saying that ad hoc?
I'm saying it ad hoc because
putting you right in the middle, is that your
Right.
understanding? Okay.
I'm saying it ad hoc because, well, because you're putting me right in the middle of it, and because this plan, Brian has taken great pains to make sure that the plan complies with relevant
Okay.
regulations, except for the ones we're seeking relief
The
from.
proposal must conform to the standards outlined in site plan review regulations. You have a positive finding in that.
We haven't been to site plan review.
It's very circular, you understand?
Yes, I do.
Yeah, but she
Having
knows
read
this.
the
She knows
ordinance,
this.
You
I
know
can
this.
tell you it is very
Yes. You know
circular.
this.
So,
Right, and that's
it
why
wasn't really an ad hoc question, you understand it?
I understand it, yes.
Thank you.
But it is a lesson in navigating the regulations in town.
We do that
You
routinely.
Yes.
There was actually one more question that,
And let me just add, and I've had this in another town, we can't get to site plan review
Until you've gone through us.
unless we get through here.
Right.
Because your regulations require us to be here if we know we need relief first. And we do.
so there was one question that was brought up at the last meeting, it was about scenic byways. And if the fact that Route 10 is a scenic byway has any effect on our project,
Yeah.
or if our project has any effect on the scenic byway. The answer is no. They're independent of each other. I followed up with the DOT scenic byways. I have an email from him that we could provide. But basically, he just said that the intent of the scenic byways is not to prohibit or affect individual development at all.
It's just a name for what might be a neat road to travel.
Exactly, yeah, and municipalities can either apply for a road to become a scenic byway or apply for a road to be discontinued as a scenic byway.
Yeah.
But individual development property has no effect on that.
And it doesn't change your authority
One
to.
question does come up because of the adequate service for utilities. The question is, you can actually do a project that big with a single-phase service?
I mean, we haven't set up a work order with PSA.
That's all you got there.
Yeah.
They wouldn't need, they wouldn't need three-phase. The lifts are single-phase lifts.
I'm not worried about that. No, I mean, just the pumps for your septic system.
I don't think it'll be an issue.
I don't think so. We've done single
That's
phase.
fine. That's a secondary
Yeah,
question.
I mean, it makes things a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean, we just need a bigger transformer or something.
Gentlemen on the board, other questions?
Yeah, I got one. In your, I guess this is a draft response letter to the April 15 meeting. Under the section crosswalk report, you said that you had met with local police chief and gone through some pedestrian crossing issues, and some modifications were suggested, and you're going to do that. And somebody had suggested a traffic study, and you say that you have done a traffic study. Can we have that, please?
You have our
We did.
traffic letter.
Yeah, we did a preliminary traffic letter, which was submitted as part of the original.
So it's just,
Tab
somewhere in here,
14.
there's a letter.
Tab 14
Okay.
of the March book is Paul Oniexka's traffic impact assessment memorandum
Ah,
dated March 12th.
yeah.
It's got traffic counts, AM, PM, site distance, traffic volumes, pedestrian traffic, all addressed.
Okay, I missed it, thanks. But we also have a request from the Regional Planning Commission
Yes.
to do traffic study. A separate one, right?
I thought that was still out there.
It
Yeah.
was a wasn't it a safety
Road
assessment?
safety audit feedback,
Yeah, okay,
and
that's good.
Dave was following up with
Yeah,
that.
I've actually spoken with the Regional Planning Commission, and they're just waiting I want to make sure the board says they want to go through with it, just because it's going to require gathering a lot of information, and want to make sure that
It's
that's.
also a fairly time-consuming process, is my impression.
Yes.
I'm somewhat concerned that the trigger accident there isn't much of a traffic accident. This is somebody who apparently lost consciousness, went off the road, and turned over into the pond.
Yes.
So while it may meet their trigger criteria, What's your feeling, gentlemen, about that, whether we need to go into deliberation to ask that question? I'm uncertain, to be honest.
The feeling about what?
The whole business of the, what do we
Additional
call it?
traffic safety.
The traffic safety assessment. I don't want to hold this process up indefinitely for,
If this is gonna be a lengthy
yeah,
process,
my
I have
impression
my
is.
reservations about it, but I think it would be useful if we could get it fairly quickly.
Right, but the question is what's fairly quickly?
Well, let's imagine this, let's imagine we grant a variance, or whatever variances they want. We should do this in deliberation,
Yeah.
but let's imagine we grant the variances, and now comes the question of what are the next steps they have to go through in order to,
That's site plan review.
that's a site plan review, it's special exceptions, and all of those, I think, become questions that the regional planning issue, or the regional traffic safety study would be required in, because that would fix more, deal with more of the details of the proposed number of people. I think that's stuff the planning board would normally handle in a site plan review, but I'm not,
That sounds fine to me.
so I don't,
Yeah,
I don't
agree
see a
with that.
need to do it right now.
Okay, I would agree
I
with
could
that.
live with that, too.
Yeah,
Would
that can
we,
go,
would we be setting conditions to whatever extent we grant a variance?
I would imagine.
I would assume so.
I don't see why we wouldn't.
Yeah.
I have two more questions to
Sure.
the applicant. No, I got one of them answered. The other one is, it's related to the population density. You mentioned during your talk a few minutes ago, you looked at the population density and characterized the residences over on the other side of the pond as more densely populated. But I'm not convinced that that's a proper representation. So my question is, do you know how many residences there are on the other side of the pond represented by the people who are challenging this application? And do you know how many people live in those residences? Do you know what the acreage is of those, that group of houses?
I know what the acreage is, I don't know how many people.
Is it a couple acres?
There are,
All 12 houses or something?
there's one that's 1.3 acres.
I mean, altogether, because it
I
is
didn't
a...
add an average, but there's one that's 0.24 acres.
Oh, I know some of them are small. They used
There's
to
one
be
that's
camps.
0.39 acres, and there's one that's 0.69.
But the total?
There's
12
also
houses.
one that's 40 acres.
There's one that's
There's
40
one that's
acres.
18.
Right.
Well, we
One
could
that's
even
11.
skip the two big ones, but take all the small ones together and say that there's 25 people there. And
I
two,
haven't done
yeah.
that analysis.
nobody's done that. Okay, so,
There is one that's got a small home portion and the rest in conservation, so, but I haven't added up the number of people.
okay, so you haven't done it, but you characterize it as more densely populated. And
No, I'm talking about certain lots have less land per unit than the proposal in front of you.
the proposal in front of us, how many acres of actual buildings? I mean, that strip of building, what's the acreage of that? Is that 2 acres?
Well, I think what we would want to do is we would make that comparison the way you're talking about it for their lot. You'd have to look at the lots across the pond and subtract those.
I'm asking if anybody's done that,
The
because we've,
hillside.
well, we've been,
lots.
but we've
Yeah.
heard about density issues,
Right.
and,
Right.
and they're characterized one way. I think of downtown Lyme, and that's the most densely populated area in town, and I doubt that it's anywhere near as densely populated as what you're proposing. But I haven't looked at the numbers, I wondered if anybody had.
Let me give a different frame of reference, since I happen to live in the one plan unit development in town. And in less acreage, we have 8 structures with just over 50% of the square footage that you propose. And probably 50 bedrooms. So the only other plan unit development is much less dense than what's been proposed. Much less dense.
50 bedrooms on how much acres?
Oh, more than this site that you're talking about. I haven't.
This is 13.
So, I mean,
Yes.
I'm talking about, village of Dartmouth Village. So, I mean, in terms of what's out there, that's the only other unit.
Plan
that's out
unit development, sure.
Yeah. And the
And
only
then,
other
yeah,
planned unit development sites.
Conversion allowances don't really speak to
Yeah.
lot size. You could have 6 on
No, I was just
any
talking about-
size lot with a building older than 5 years.
I was just talking about scale.
Yeah.
Okay, I think the scale thing, we can probably hold, just sort of hold on for now. Particularly given the fact that we're approaching 9:15. David, you have 2 suspiciously large piles of paper there. Are they relevant to our discussions?
No, they're just letters from emails that I've received over the last few weeks, either for or against the project, and so.
Okay, so we, at some point, each board member should be given a packet of these, which you have, I take it?
Yes.
So that we can review those at our leisure. I just want to make sure they're in the public record. And we have then an additional letter which you can add to the
Yeah, and that,
expression of concern.
there is a copy of that. That letter was sent to 3 different people, and my copy is in what I'm passing around now.
Excellent, fine, good, so that's just fine. Thank you, Walter.
So can I assume that this is basically except for the package we got earlier, this is a summary of all written public comment
It
that
is
we've
all the
received so
written,
far?
well, other than what I've already,
Yeah, okay.
Okay, so I will ask quickly whether other members of the audience have anything they wish to say, and then I want to briefly discuss how we're going to proceed forward, and then we've got to set a time for another special meeting to begin deliberation. As a point of general information, my colleague, Mr. Titus, has prepared a draft findings of fact. And my goal is to have at the beginning of the next session, since I think it's getting late tonight, to review this so that the board has an agreed upon set of data that has been made public that then will be used to form our deliberations. At that time, I will, and several board members I'm sure will join me in this, ask a very specific set of review questions about precisely what it is we are going to vote on. And then we will go from there. Have I missed anything? Michael, did you have any comments or thoughts?
No.
Okay.
We have one outstanding item, which is our meeting with fire chief.
Yeah.
Which we have not been able to accomplish because his schedule has made it impossible. One thought we had was we could, if the board would like, have an independent fire code review to present on those issues that are relevant to your decision.
In all honesty, you will not get a building permit without a fire code review. So the board can look at these things, but
But it
do
was
you all
something that we
consider
were
a meeting with the fire
supposed to
chief critical?
get input.
Initially?
No, I don't
Not for the
think,
variance.
not for
Not for
variance, I don't
variance.
believe it is.
Okay, and it
I mean,
relates to the special exceptions. So
Right,
we
but
can
I mean,
hold
But we're
it.
dealing with
my major
Right.
concern of the special exceptions is we've got to get that place staked and the Conservation Commission up there, because we can't proceed without that.
Right.
And so that, to some degree, our next meeting is dependent on that happening.
Mhm.
So my question then becomes very simply, are we in a position to schedule the next meeting? We really have to make a continuation. And the question is, how soon in the future should we do that?
Before we get any further comments, though.
Well,
We're ready.
I don't think so.
Everybody's happy with express?
I haven't seen any
opinion?
hands go up. so,
Okay.
but-
No, what, nobody wants to speak?
Well, a lot of people have spoken already. We're,
Go on, Jackie, last.
Jackie?
I would just like to emphasise the importance of the traffic study. I drive along that road at least 4 times a day.
Yeah.
And in the winter, if it's not a nightmare, in the summer you can cope because you can see, but in the winter it's very bad.
okay.
Yes, thank you, Jackie. Walter?
No, I just said that I thought I saw a couple
Yeah,
of hands.
you did one hand. David?
It strikes me that at your next meeting, you could do the findings of fact, and you could vote on the variance, the fundamental variance issue. If the variance is denied, then you don't need to do anything more in terms of the special exception criteria. If it's approved, it could be approved on condition that whatever additional work is needed
Right,
for the
that's-
special exception.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, now, from the standpoint of council, Bobby, is that an acceptable view?
Yes.
Fine, good. I just want to make sure both sides are on the record there, David. So the question is, when to try and schedule this?
Well, do we have any inkling of reality or realistic of getting the additional staking and of David, quick on conservation, perhaps, any clue?
I have emailed Blake, I've not heard anything back from him. And Rich,
The
have you?
property's ready.
Blake met with the board this Monday.
It would be, yes, it would be Monday, they had a meeting.
Monday. And we said basically we need to find time in the next week. He did not give me specific dates, so I'll work more closely with him to find out what.
But he thought next week, is that what you said?
I don't know when our surveyor can come out, but we can, I'll work directly with Blake.
Sounds like
Yeah, but we have to,
I'll do a date certain.
we have to do a date certain, yes. I mean, the question is, 13th looks like it's too early. 20th. Excuse me? Yeah, the 21st is our usual meeting.
Yeah,
How many cases do we have?
For the 21st?
Probably don't want to know that number right now.
6.
Oh, jeez.
That's what I said, it is suicidal depression.
We're taking volunteers from the audience.
I thought it would go up.
Yeah, that's why I was, like, might spoil the rest of the evening.
Yeah.
In any event, we could do it, unless, if you feel that just the anticipation is enough to ruin Wednesday, we could go to the 27th.
I'll be away on the 27th.
You'll be away.
How about the 20th, though?
I want, then I'm gonna recommend we go to the 20th.
I won't be able to make that.
Oh dear. The 13th looks too early. Got some other ideas?
We're leaving on vacation on the 21st.
And then what,
And I do have a caucus in there for the 21st already, so I might be able to make that.
Something wrong with 18, 19?
Not very, I don't believe so for me.
Monday, Tuesday?
Yeah.
18, 19?
Get the calendar.
Yeah, we'll grab the calendar for the room.
Yeah.
22?
Could do,
We could always go somewhere else.
the road committee has
Oh, we started 7:30.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, wait, are you going to that too? Is there a meeting before that, though? You could be here all night.
Yeah, I mean,
So you on the road?
yeah.
I know you are safe on the road. What I want to know is whether,
When are they gonna start using the vibratory roller on the road?
I think probably after water.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm really looking forward to that.
I'd be happy with the 18th or the 19th.
Yeah, I would too.
But
18th, there's something happening on the 18th.
You didn't bring your
I have my calendar, but,
You don't have everything on it.
no, sir, I do not.
Oh,
I think the
David has
19th.
the 18th, 19th.
Yes.
This room is taken
Until when?
One meeting starting at 7:30 and the other one starting at 6.
It's a 6, when's it 6
One
over?
that starts on the 6th will be open.
The roads committee goes 6 to 7.
Okay, so
So what day is that?
that's the 19th.
Let's do the
Bobby?
19th.
So
It's
we're-
supposed to be in Seabrook now.
Oh,
I'll
this is
come
much
here.
better
It's
than
much
Seabrook.
better.
Tuesday the 19th?
So we're gonna move to,
Yeah, that's our favorite.
Sorry,
What
Lou.
day, what day is it?
19.
19th, if I can't be here, I'll have somebody else.
Okay,
Okay.
fine. Yeah, I really would like to keep this
That'll
moving.
just be deliberations anyway, right?
What we'll do is, and this is very critical, is we're going to go through findings of fact
right.
first.
There won't be any input from us at this point.
Right.
Basically, what I want is to make sure that what we think we're talking about deliberating on hasn't missed anything. Or does not include information which is erroneous in some way, shape, or form.
So during that process, we could in theory participate and say,
Yes, you could.
okay, okay.
No, the meeting only closes when we begin deliberation.
Okay.
And the findings of fact are not necessarily part of the deliberation, though they can be.
They can be, yeah.
But I think in the case of such a complex proceeding,
I would agree.
we're better making accessible to the public, so that way, particularly if this thing goes somewhere else eventually,
Yeah.
we're all agreed on the decision criteria we've used. Does that seem reasonable to you, Walter?
Yep, I'm happy.
Bill? Good. Gentlemen? Okay.
So is there no, because you just kind of immediately went from David's comment to scheduling, is that the end of public comment?
No, I didn't,
For this meeting, but I mean for subsequent meetings as well?
There would be I would appreciate it if we did not have a lot of public comment. Of course, the public is welcome to comment until we go into deliberation. But I'd hope public comment would be over tonight. But no, by definition, if
It's
we're
no
talking
gag
about the findings,
Yep,
public comment is accessible.
okay, until, as you say, until you go into deliberation.
Yeah.
Okay.
But the idea is that I want a bulleted list of things, and so that whoever gets this next has got a piece of paper that says, this is what the decision criteria were. I think that's the only way to be fair to all parties in this thing.
And is that coming out ahead of time or at the next meeting?
I think that is gonna be at the next meeting, isn't it?
That's next meeting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, no, we've got a preliminary draft of it, but I want to discuss it point by point. And then what I propose to do, if Adair, would it be acceptable to you if we gave you a electronic version of what Rob has produced and I've edited, so that you, if you want to bring a laptop with you, can then add to it
Yeah.
as we go? Does that sound like a reasonable course of action, folks? Hmm? No? Okay, good.
No, I'm getting to the answers. We have a draft of findings of fact. It's incomplete.
Yes, yep.
Is it public information?
Not yet,
Why not?
because I don't think until we get it complete, it should be. People haven't, you haven't had a chance to
You haven't
express
had a
it.
chance to
You
have
haven't
input.
talked to it. I may be wrong.
Okay. All right.
I mean, basically, I want the board to go through this bit by bit and review it, but I don't think, given the rules we work under, that I can distribute it to the whole board
Until we're in our next meeting.
until we're in our next meeting. But I
would-
have the
I would
draft,
kind of lean the same way.
I have the draft that I've requested,
Yeah.
because I did ask at the last meeting, if any of you have particular findings of fact, send them to me so I can collate them. But that's all I'm trying to do, but this then becomes a very specifically public document when the board has discussed it, only in terms of the information contained, not the thought process of the board in deliberation, because I don't want to contaminate the two.
Are you going to articulate the decision criteria?
In what sense?
I don't know, I thought you just talked a minute ago about criteria, and
No,
now you have another document that's called.
No, the
findings of
decision
fact.
criteria are clear in the RSA's.
You talked about a bulleted document.
That's finding of fact only.
Okay, you used some words interchangeably then, at
You
least
did
I heard
have
you
it,
do
okay.
that.
I'm
so-
sorry, no, that's my error.
Okay, so I was wondering if there's a
No, I
companion
wouldn't.
document that
No.
is someplace over there we have.
The only
You will
thing,
have to read it in Sanskrit.
Yeah, we can, or Devongar, we can get it to either.
So is your proposal to release that document when we go into deliberation, is that?
No, my proposal is to discuss the points we want as finding of facts for deliberation in public. But I read this out, and the board says, that's a finding of fact. I read the next one out, the board says, that's a finding of fact. Or, no, I want to modify that.
In deliberation.
I don't see why we can't do that in public session.
We're not voting on it. It's just
Not
whether we're
Because we're
considering.
deliberating, we'll be arguing,
Among ourselves.
yeah, among ourselves.
Then we have to do it in
has to
deliberation.
be in
So-
deliberation.
so
There
if-
may-
Mr.
there
Chairman,
may be- There may be public
If you have,
clarification.
if you have the intent to cover certain topics in your finding of facts, and you want to publish those in advance, so we could be thinking about them, I guess I don't have any problem with that, but I think the content of that only surfaces when we're in deliberation.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, fine.
If you want an agenda or an outline, I have no problem with publishing
Okay, so
that.
we can produce an agenda
I would believe so.
that,
Of items we're gonna discuss.
of items to discuss,
Correct.
Okay.
Under
but not the
findings of-
text of them.
Right.
Got it, okay, that we can do, and then that means I can circulate that legally
To
through
everybody.
David
To everybody.
to everybody who's interested.
Yep.
Thank you all very much for clarifying that, that gets us to exactly where we want to be. Good.
You had a question?
Oh,
Dave-
It was procedural, I think you just came around to it, which was earlier, as you were discussing the findings of fact, you had made the statement that that discussion would allow for input or
Yeah.
for you to ask questions, which is something you clearly could not do if you were doing that in a deliberative
That's
session.
correct, that's exactly,
So-
what my colleagues
Yep.
have done is resolved the dilemma for me
Yep,
by saying you can make a bulleted list of the topics,
Right.
which we can talk about.
and I sat
But
back
not
and
the
watched that
text.
happen beautifully, and my question went away.
Yeah, no, that's why we work together on this. I would like to hear a motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.